Well. Good morning, everybody. In case thou art here. Let me see if the stream has started. Not yet. Here we go. Yes. It works. So, good morning, everybody, to Friday. What's it? The 10th of January and the last breakfast, tea drinking, somewhat productive, whatever thing these are these days for this week. I'll probably, definitely, unless something terrible happens, I'll be back on Monday with those, and maybe I'll make a video over the weekend. Who knows? Hey, Britton, how you doing? Yeah. I've spent the last day reading way too much of The Power Broker by Robert Caro, and it is an excellently written book. I totally understand why this got a Pulitzer back 50 years ago. I'm pretty sure it would still get one. It is long, according to Goodreads, the book has like 1,200 something pages. The audiobook has 66 hours. It's very detailed, and it's an interesting read. If, say, 1920s, 1930s American history is something you're interested in, I guess that's like the first important part here, is that you need to have some interest in those kind of things, because that's just like part of what happens there, beyond the sort of also interesting aspect of just Robert Moses as a character and the way he abused and used power. Nice, Britain. So how far along are you now? And how are you liking it by now? Because there's a lot happening in that book after a while. It starts out with just with Landsman knowing nothing, and then things get somewhat interesting relatively quickly. So yes, I can highly recommend The Power Broker in case American history biography something you're interested in. I think what it also shows, and this is something very interesting to me, and it kind of dovetails with a book like Cadillac Desert and some others, the sort of really weird attitude of Americans towards sort of like independence, and the hatred or enmity towards federal subsidies and all of that, and that you want to be strong and independent, get your shit done on your own, and people who seem to be able to do that are worshipped in a lot of ways. But when you actually look at what's going on, a lot of them are taking government subsidies and using taxpayer money all the time. It's way more about creating that myth of not using tax money to do something than it is about actually doing that. And when you look at most of these sort of like things that are held up at least in recent years, and when it comes to sort of like more public good stuff beyond, even, just like the robber barons and billionaires that obviously also mostly get fat on government money. It's Elon Musk is not exactly not taking taxpayer money for SpaceX and all the other stuff that he's doing, right? So that weird sort of double standard, or whatever you want to call it, of on the one hand praising people for not using tax money and being independent, and at the same time everyone being very much reliant on government subsidies is very interesting, and I feel like key element of the American psyche. And you see that a lot, obviously, with Moses being someone who works for the government supposedly in a lot of ways, and is getting rich, don't get me wrong. Obviously also because much of what he does is happening in the late 20s and early 30s during the Great Depression and the New Deal, where getting as much federal money as possible is obviously what everyone does, understandably, and it's a good thing. So it's an interesting thing in that regard, because it shows something that I've been aware of for a long time. and something that will come up in the Mormonism video, of course. Hey, Apollo. Good morning. How you doing? Oh, that's interesting, Ori. I did not know that. I listened to like one interview he did with, was it the New York Times podcast, something like that, and he spoke more about how he's working and how he's currently working on like his multi-volume Lyndon B. Johnson thing, Lyndon B. Johnson biography, and how he's working together with his wife and how she's helping him writing biographies by being much more of a social person than he is, and getting like getting to know all the people that knew people like Johnson and everyone else personally, because he's able to actually talk to humans and he's not so much that kind of person. So that was an interesting interview as well. But yeah, but beyond anything else, it is just also really, really well written. This is really good prose, like prose style wise, in something, biographies. I think like a lot of biography and history books, modern history books have taken a lot of like inspiration from how Caro does in fact go through these things. It's a really good book, and I was scared by, not scared, but like somewhat intimidated by the length. And I was like, do I really want to listen to 66 hours about one dude building parks and bridges? Turns out, yeah, I'm a long bit in, and it's really really good. It doesn't get dry or boring in any way or form. It is, yeah. That's kind of the thing there, Britain. It does feel somewhat older, but yeah, it takes place around the year 2000, I guess. I think it does state a year somewhere, but I'm not quite sure. But it's, I mean, I guess you can tell because it's the whole idea was that they had that the land grant they had in Sitka is for 50 years, and it is running out. So I guess it was granted in like 48 or 49. So it kind of runs out around the millennium. So it's technically taking place around 1999. I mean, they're using mobile phones, right? Yeah, I that's what I think, Ori. It is deliberate to have that city feel stuck in the past in a lot of ways, and I think it's deliberate because it's sort of about, on the one hand you have those communities, as you said, but on the other hand you also have people who just don't actually have a future, right? This is that's part of the idea, right? You need sort of like a future to actually move towards the future, because if you know that in 50 years you'll be gone, why would you develop like your own sort of specific culture and so forth? And there are these hints, right? The whole like polar bear thing, that the chic that he describes in the beginning is like, yeah, that's like sort of the euphoria and the enthusiasm of the early years. And once the community realized that it's basically not going to stay here, that sort of like willingness to develop a future is certainly is gone again, I think. And I feel that's a pretty astute sort of observation in general. Yeah, Cavalier and Clay obviously is one. That's true. But yeah, in general, I do really really enjoy the book. Like, but like Michael Chabon is so good at evoking like the sense of place for that Sitka set thing is just like the way he does that. I think is really impressive in a lot of ways. And of course, Landsman and Berko make for like a really really fun sort of cop duo in a lot of ways. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. That's like another thing that I find interesting, in the same way that people always say that Stephen Erickson is really good at writing these sort of like male friendships of like two friends. I mean, you have that in the Malazan Book of the Fallen a lot, and Erickson obviously mentioning that he's been inspired in a lot of ways also by Fritz Lieber and the Fafhrd and Grey Mouse, a sort of male friendship, which is one of the archetypes of or like one of the prime examples for that in, say, genre literature, I would argue. It's interesting to see that like almost every Michael Chabon book that I've read does have the same thing, right? You have Cavalier and Clay in The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and you have Berko and Lanzmann in the Yiddish Policemen's Union, and you of course have Seligman and what's the other guy's name in Gentlemen of the Road as well with that. So he also has these like very clear like male friendships that sometimes are part of family because obviously they're technically cousins in both Cavalier and Clay and Yiddish Policemen's Union, but it's also about this sort of like male friendship that usually has like two very, very different people coming together and doing and working that way. And I think on the one hand, obviously, clearly, Michael Chabon has been inspired by Fafhrd and Grey Mouse when he wrote Yiddish Police, not Yiddish Policemen's Union, but Gentlemen of the Road. But I think I guess it's the closest you can get to like a very specific sort of dude element in a lot of modern literature. I know there's a whole like lit bro kind of thing and what people call bro literature or whatever. But I think that specific portrayal of a male friendship that is always sort of like colored with a lot of tension around insecurities and so forth, and how you dance around those insecurities and how you mention them or don't mention them or accept them, but still accept them, and how you do a lot of things by not talking about it and so forth. I think that's something that rings true to a lot of people. Because it's one way of sort of like looking at the idea of toxic masculinity from a male point of view without oftentimes at least without sort of like having the vocabulary like toxic masculinity and so forth at your hands. I mean, obviously Fritz Lieber did not know about the term toxic masculinity, but when you look at, say, Fafhrd and Mauser and how they sort of try to outdo each other or are angry at each other and try to mostly outdo each other in really stupid ways, right? He's really good at portraying that without having sort of like the framework for it. And I think in a way that's something you can see with Chabon, and you see that with Stephen Erickson as well. And I think it's a sign for an author having both like experience at being a dude in oftentimes more like very sort of like also in areas where that where masculinity still is something that you need to sort of like present in some way or another, or perform in some way or another to sort of get ahead or whatever. Interestingly enough, I think that's never like actual sort of like violence or physical, not often very physical sort of jobs or surroundings, but more like intellectual or whatever. But you can be toxically masculine when it comes to intellectuality or intellectualism, of course. But all three of these authors, right, have had those backgrounds, and I'm wondering if that sort of like has influenced that, in a lot of ways. I still have to read Latham. There's a new story collection, I think, coming out in October, November. I think I've seen that in like the list of upcoming audiobooks or whatever. So I might be confused there. I mean, but I would argue that that Michael Chabon is probably one of the best American dude writers, period. He does obviously write from a American Jewish perspective, but he certainly has the American perspective in there very much. And I've seen he also has like essays, or was editor of like an essay collection about the West Bank occupation. I haven't read that yet. I don't know if you've read that, Ori, because it sounds like something that might be interesting. Because clearly, I think that's, I guess, where the Jewish part comes in. He is Jewish, but he's also very explicitly writing about Jewish concerns, both in an American context and in an international context, and that's something I find interesting. Also, something he's qualified to do, unlike Dan Simmons, who constantly has to put Jews into his books for whatever reason. Just recently got like another really angry comments on my Olympus video, telling me how I'm getting it all wrong, and how Dan Simmons is obviously right in being a misogynist and anti-Semite and Islamophobe, because clearly Islam and feminism are dangerous and cause a lot of harm. So a good writer must condemn them in their books. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, man. Well, that's my very personal frustration and war against Dan Simmons, which is impossible to wage on BookTube because everyone loves Dan Simmons. Oh, okay. No, I did not follow that when he went to Hebron. I've only comparatively recently paid more attention to what Michael Chabon does, so I'm, yeah, I saw that book, but I haven't read it. I just it popped up at some point in Audible search results or recommendations, so maybe they're actually sometimes getting things right. I don't know. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's really bad, and I've already reported some for hate speech on that video. I just don't want to go back there and read them again to figure out which ones to remove as well, because holy shit. Now that's an interesting thing. That sounds really good, like the Art Spiegelman project there. I don't know. I haven't heard anything from Michael Chabon in a while. I mean, don't know what he's doing. I'm neither like on creative projects nor anything else, so I don't know what he's doing. I think that's like the other questions with those kind of things is always like, which people do have like a responsibility to speak out publicly, and which not. Obviously, there have been like a lot of people, demanding from every, like when the whole like thing started up in earnest after October 7th, 2023, like shortly after that, like everyone is like was asking their favorite musician, favorite whatever, to comment on. Is like, those are entertainers. They don't necessarily have a need. They don't have a responsibility to talk about anything political, unless they are somewhat connected to that. Now, obviously, with Michael Chabon and his past with editing that book, and obviously writing about American Jewish concerns and so forth, I can see why it sticks out that he's not saying anything. But then again, as I said, I haven't seen him talk about anything, so maybe he's just currently in general not a public intellectual, I guess, but a closeted intellectual. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not on Instagram. I mean, I technically have an Instagram account, but I'm not doing anything on that because that app is so inaccessible, which is understandable. I mean, it's a social network about posting pictures, so I understand why they're not trying to make it as accessible as possible to blind people, because you know, the act of taking pictures is already very inaccessible. So why would you? Oh yeah, Apollo. I can see how I should probably go through that comment section again and maybe do something, because if you're sort of like if you click on that video and before you watch the video you read that comment section, I think it can be very disheartening. Which is, but on the other hand, like seeing that comment section, I think is one of the best arguments why I'm right about Dan Simmons being a highly problematic author, because clearly it's the one guy when I criticize his books where I get hate in large amounts. Like the Robert Jordan fans are more chill when I talk about Where Wheel of Time sucks than the Dan Simmons fans, and like there's something interesting going on there. I think in the way that science fiction fans or genre fiction fans in general worship Dan Simmons for something and are completely incapable of accepting any faults of his, which is really frustrating, because compared to say Robert Jordan, he's very clear about his opinions and stuff, right? There's that whole like incredibly Islamophobic, racist short story thing that he wrote about time travel and whatnot. I don't even want to go back there. So it's very clear where he stands, but still people are incapable of accepting that, and instead are doubling down with Dan Simmons. Both the actual Nazis that comment on my videos, and the people on BookTube who still go and ask him, is Ilium and Olympus the most complex science fiction ever written? Which, nah, of course not. Or get really mad when you mention that there are already signs of his, problematic opinions in books like Hyperion, which is obviously less overt in its Islamophobia than later books. Although even there, you can see already the roots. And if you mention that, you already get a lot of people being mad and telling you should not, always destroy people's enjoyment of books. And I mean, Dan Simmons is arguably BookTube's holy cow when it comes to science fiction. See, I didn't watch a single episode of Picard, so I have no idea about any of that. I think that's maybe my other big failure as someone who's doing BookTube content, is like I pay far too little attention to what authors are doing. And I'm constantly surprised when they have like new books. I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. But maybe it's a good thing, because it means I'm spending very little time on social media, which is probably also good. I think Hyperion is not the worst written book ever. But don't get me wrong. It's Dan Simmons knew how to use words. I would argue that he got worse at it. Just like from a pure like novel writing craft kind of perspective, even there he got worse. But I can understand why people are sort of impressed by Hyperion when they read it for the first time. My problem is that people that have read more than one book should be able to understand what Dan Simmons is doing and why it is in fact not exactly, the masterpiece that people think it is. It's like, yeah, look, you've obviously patterned this after the Canterbury tales. I get it. That's why you call them pilgrims. I totally understand that part, right? It doesn't impress me that you have maybe read the Canterbury tales. You were an English teacher. You're supposed to have known this thing. And then you make a John Keats thing. But he makes all of these literary references and so forth. He makes them so overtly that everyone at the back of the class is aware that he knows the Western canon, and then or at least that part of the Western canon that really makes you appear smart, or used to make you appear smart to dudes in like the 80s, I guess. And that's the frustrating thing for me, because it feels like he's a blender, right? He's just he's just like he's just pretending. I mean, obviously he has read a lot of stuff, don't get me wrong, but so have I. And I would not pretend to be a smart intellectual or anything of the sorts. And it frustrates me that that he gets away with pretending to be incredibly erudite and intellectual, and that's clearly because he can reference classic English literature. That makes his books automatically good or makes them more complex or sophisticated than anything else. And that's just not true. And it is so frustrating because a lot of the people that go for this kind of feel that they are now smarter by association, by liking a book that references, I don't know, Keats and Shakespeare and the Canterbury Tales, and uh, and are incapable of looking behind those, like, that surface, and understand that there's nothing behind that. There's nothing behind that but the frustration of a guy who feels that now that people are reading different books than the Canterbury Tales and the stuff that he taught in high school, that that's no longer respected, and that he doesn't get all the benefits of white educated privilege that he used to get. And the longer you read his books and the further along you get, the more bitter he seems to get about the fact that obviously that doesn't count for as much as it used to count back in, I don't know, his mind, I guess, in the 1950s or whatever. And that's all that Dan Simmons is at his core. Dan Simmons is a bitter old white man who is frustrated about not getting the respect he thinks is due him, and everyone is falling for it, and it's just revolting. Yeah, I've seen that she has that video, but it's like several hours long, and since I haven't watched the video, since I didn't watch the show, I didn't feel the need to watch her video on it. See, I think The Scholar's Tale is one where it kind of falls down already, because The Scholar's Tale doesn't actually go very deep with this. Yeah, it's super long, so I didn't watch it. I don't know. I've seen that Angela has like a new video on her on her relatively new-ish BookTube channel on books are failing as physical objects. That's from like yesterday, but I haven't watched it yet, so I don't know what it is about. I also haven't watched her like books I read last year video yet. But I appreciate her approach to talking about books, and I'm glad she at least enjoyed parts of Canticle for Leibowitz. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's I don't know. It just makes me happy when people read Canticle for Leibowitz and realize what an interesting book it is in general. So Anyway, my tea is running out. Shall we do a sprint so I can make more tea and answer YouTube comments and stuff, and then we come back and talk about more things. Also, we don't always need to talk about Dan Simmons, my my nemesis, I guess. Like, okay, Britain, I don't mind gender swapping that because it does showcase, the insane sexism that a lot of a lot of noir hard-boiled stuff did have in the day. So I'm fine with that. I think my issues with both Hyperion and the rest of the Hyperion and Endymion Cantos stuff run deeper than that. But yeah, it is shallow in a lot of ways. That's the problem. But if you name drop Shakespeare, everyone in sci-fi goes, "Whoa! Clearly, this is speculative fiction or magical realism, and no longer sci-fi or fantasy like the people down there are writing." You know, it's Dan Simmons does the same thing that Salman Rushdie does, but he does it even worse. And I think it's the same thing that irritates me with Salman Rushdie's stuff about Wonder Tales and stuff. It's that arrogance of wanting to be an intellectual and serious author. Now, in the case of Salman Rushdie, I would argue that he is, which makes his like posturing so annoying to me. It's like just don't say that, and everyone already thinks you are, a serious writer of literature and so forth. Right? You don't have to do that. And then Simmons clearly isn't, but wants to be so desperately wants to be that kind of writer, and he isn't. And but everyone falls for it, and I don't know. It's frustrating. Anyway, let's get like sprinting, because otherwise I'll just like rant about Dan Simmons forever, and we don't want that. I mean, hopefully. All right. I should be unmuted again. Hello, Kat. I have no idea about that one. I think it is just another sign, another proof that God does indeed exist and he's a massive dick, which is why I said he. Just catching up here. The canon thing. Also, hello, Chantel. I've seen that. I'm going through this chat now in a minute. I think is canon is complex. I think it's sometimes it basically kind of builds itself whether you want to or not. So, like, obviously, you need to sort of figure out what you're teaching people in school or whatever. You need to narrow it down because obviously there's so much stuff out there that kind of happens by itself. Like you can see that with like with say specific genres of art, right? There is no Harold Bloom approved canon of science fiction. There are obviously multiple lists of what you should read and so forth. It's just a thing that happens by itself, the same way as for music, right? There's no official canon of punk rock or official canon of heavy metal, but there is still, if you talk to people who are fans of those specific genres of music, they will give you a list of what they think is essential listening, is essential reading when you're talking about fantasy books and so forth. Same for movies, or whatever. It's just sort of like a tendency that we have as humans to build those kind of to create something like a canon in a lot of ways. The question is usually what you do with that. And the specific Western canon, or whatever you want to call it, and I'm usually singling out Harold Bloom because he wrote, fairly influential books and on the subject, and is often sort of like pushed forward as sort of like the sort of arbiter of what a Western canon is or was back when he wrote those books. The idea there is that you suddenly tied to an authority, right? You tied to one authority, and you use it then to sort of like as a mode of class distinction, of a mode of distinction in a Bourdieu style of doing that, and that is of course a problem. That is where I disagree. And looking at even I've looked through that list of the Harold Bloom canon, and there's a bunch of really important books in there, right? Do I think everyone on the planet should read Don Quixote? Well, yes, I do, but that's because I really like the book. I don't think it's necessarily, it's essential to have read all of these, but I think it's sort of it helps understand sort of like a cultural background if you're aware of what those specific texts are, and if you're aware of which texts have formed our culture. That doesn't mean you don't have to enjoy them. It means you can then go say, well, actually, the fact that everyone has read this specific book and is building their worldview on it is, bad, right? If you're looking at, say, if you're looking at a canon of literature that has formed millennials and late millennials, younger millennials, and older Gen Z people, I guess that would include stuff like Twilight, Harry Potter, and a bunch more. And it's like, agreeing that those are books, the Hunger Games, saying that these are the books that have formed, have had a massive impact on us, and are sort of like the canon of the early 2000s in a way, right? Is one thing. Going, these are all really good books, is a very different thing. So having an understanding of a somewhat vaguely defined canon, I think, is unavoidable. Turning it into a measure of erudition, turning it into a sort of turning it into an authority in itself, in a way, I think, is where the problem lies. The problem lies with authority, is where I'm standing. And obviously, with specifically with Dan fucking Simmons, the problem is that he turns it that he's very, very focused on one specific subpart, even of what you might call Harold Bloom's Western canon. He's very focused on mostly Anglo-American, mostly British literature. Yes, he adds Marcel Proust in the Ilium and Olympus, but he's very specifically focused on one subset of that. And that's because he's a fucking reactionary, and he has a very specific sort of idea of what he considers culture and what he considers cultured. And that's books written by old white men that deal with old white men problems and are all about how old white men are in fact the smartest people on the planet. And that's where the thing gets super fucking frustrating. Because it does show his very clear political leanings in the kind of books he considers a mark of education and erudition. And so there's multiple layers to this, I think. Uh, but see, Chantal, I think there's a difference there in what you do and how you portray certain things, right? That's kind of where the problem lies with a lot of that. Because while that comment may be considered sexist if you want to, in that specific situation, in that specific circumstance, and I guess, I mean, obviously not being part of any military or whatever, I obviously lack context there, but I think there's a layer of sort of familiarity that you have in such a situation that does make it a very different thing from me saying the same thing to random people on the street, right? That would be that context matters, I think. Yeah, that sounds like it will give you a very thick skin indeed, Chantal. That's definitely a hard combination there. But that's kind of the point, right? Like the idea of gender swapping can certainly show specific things, and I feel in that regard it can be used. But just gender swapping something does not make it feminist, does not make it anything else. You have to do something with that. It's the same way that a lot of these Greek myth retellings that are often called feminist, and there's interesting videos on that. There's what's her name? Um, I need to look it up, like a longer video essay on why those new myth retellings are not actually that good. A lot of them. That alone doesn't change it, and helping people to reach the top shelves when grocery shopping should not be about gender, right? If there's a smaller dude there and you're tall, then you should do the same thing because it's about helping someone, helping a human being. The gender should not be the thing there, right? And that's sometimes that's harder than it sounds, because in that a lot of people don't understand that. It's like the same thing, like, well, of course I'm a gentleman, I pull out chairs, I open doors for women. It's like, why only for women as a dude? Why not also for a dude? If you're walking together and you're the person reaching the door, you hold it open for whoever's with you, right? That's that should be understandable, but I think it's difficult for some people to realize that that's the point. It's not that you should not open doors, it's that you should do that for everyone because they're human and not because they're women, right? For dudes in that regard. Hey, Breaking Spines, how you doing? That does sound partly your fault indeed. Here I am. It's been snowing and raining and snowing the last days. So once I'm done sprinting, I'll find out whether there are actual buses going. Yesterday there was a bus. I have no idea how things are today. So it remains interesting. Very good, bro. Why would you say that Blood Meridian is not a great American novel? I think it did. I'm Great American novel sounds weird, but I think Blood Meridian is certainly a novel that has had an impact on other writers. In that regard, it has already had an impact. It certainly, together with probably Lonesome Dove, which I still haven't read, it's certainly, a key part of the American literature reckoning, or starting to have a reckoning with the myths of the American West. So in that regard, it definitely counts. Yeah, there's enough really good books out there for like people coming into the reading age. Crestomancy by Diana Wynne Jones. I haven't read that, but since Diana Wynne Jones is Diana Wynne Jones, that's already a big plus there. I mean, she can always just read Redwall because it does have all of these cool things. It does even have, not really school, but it has pirates and it has knights and they're all animals, and it also has other stuff that is really fun. But I might be biased there. And yes, Crestomancy by Diana Wynne Jones. Once she's slightly older, there's always a Wizard of Earthsea, and beyond that, like, yeah, let children pick whatever they want to read, as long as she wants to read something. I guess that's like the key thing there. A Magical Bakery. Is it Legends and Lattes? I hope not. Yeah, Mausazan. That's exactly what it is. I have never been interested in any of these like magical cozy books, but I've said that before. It's like Magical Bakery. But clearly, there's a market for that. There's a need for those kind of books, so I'm totally fine with it. Just not something I'm particularly interested in. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these sort of wizard school books, right? Long before Harry Potter came along. I just constantly forget which ones, which other ones there are. There's also like a book by Keith Roberts that I still wanted to read, and I always keep forgetting to read it. About a young witch, and I always that sounds like it might be fun, although it's probably very, very dated because it was written in the 50s or 60s, and a teenage witch trying to live a teenage life in London while also being a witch. Yeah, I think that's like the main things, like knowing why something appeals to a lot of people and also knowing why it is not for you is the key, which is why I'm not reading Legends and Lattes, because I know it's not for me. I mean, there's also just if it's middle grade, like she can also try the Tiffany Aching books by Terry Pratchett, which are obviously really good. They get somewhat serious relatively quickly, though. Yeah, Anita is the Keith Roberts one. Maybe I should read more Keith Roberts in general, because I really, really enjoyed Pavan, which is one of those really good books that too few people know about these days. Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I think, I mean, that's the thing, right? There have always been, when you look at like AO3 and you look at fan fiction, there have always been sort of alternate world fan fictions of different characters from all kinds of more darker, grimmer, whatever, violent pieces of fiction, just opening coffee shops or whatever. That stuff is not new. There have been like Arya and Sansa Stark opening a coffee shop fan fiction. That stuff existed for a long time. What Travis Baldrey did is take that concept and put it into a familiar thing setting. This being basically Dungeons and Dragons with the serial numbers filed off, so he can publish it as a commercial book because it's no longer tied to a specific IP that whose copyright holder could then sue the hell out of him. So the market was already there before. So in that regard, and I'm not saying he didn't want to write that book. Clearly, clearly that was the case. But I think there is there was a market before that book was written. It just was the first book that showed publishers that that market existed, because publishers clearly don't look at AO3. They just look at self-published books selling really well, and then just like signing every single author who has written plans to write something like that, and then just like swamp the market until in 2 years the next thing comes along and they realize, oh, we can sell this now. But that's just like how capitalism works. But I think that's the genius of Legends and Lattes, is not coming out of nowhere, but coming out of a already sort of large group of people, fandom for these specific kind of stories, and finding a way to commercialize it in a way that fan fiction cannot be commercialized. Yeah, I mean that's the best thing, Card, right? Like, if she's picking books anyway, then like why interfere? I luckily have not even heard of Pumpkin Spice Cafe. But I just like it's interesting to see that, right? I obviously scroll through like the books on, say, Audible that are up for pre-order, and you can see these patterns come up. When you see something is big, then suddenly lots of books with similar titles pop up. There's like, when Fourth Wing became huge, since then there have been like 20 different dragon related fantasy series starting, at least. Now, like, I have not checked on each of those if all of them are basically self-published AI stuff, or by self-published authors who just write whatever they feel like writing to market in the hopes that this time they'll actually make it, or if those are published by big publishers. But there's like at least a dozen, I guess, different something dragon related fantasy romance series popping up now that this has happened. And the same thing for cozy fantasy with Legend and Lattes, right? There's like 5 or 6 different cozy fantasy series with like some vague alliteration kind of thing in the title. And that's a really good way of killing any kind of subgenre immediately by swamping the market, because this will go work for like 1 year or 2 years, and then exhaustion will take over, and the next thing will come up. But when has when has the fact that something is only very, very short term and will not last ever deterred people from doing it, right? Well, I haven't read Fourth Wing, so I can't say anything about it. It just like you could see when you looked at like books to be published and books getting published that the success of Fourth Wing, no matter its quality, did lead to suddenly a lot of books being published and marketed towards that specific audience. And the same thing you could see with, as I said, the cozy stuff. Once Legend and Lattes had its big, well, comparatively big, obviously not by a long shot the same dimensions as Fourth Wing, right? Like sort of slightly bigger hype around it. So I guess the question is which thing will be the next thing. I have no idea, but I guess I should watch Book Talk to find that one out. But for now, it's still mostly dragon books and coffee shop books for whatever reason. The next thing will certainly happen, though. I thought Goblins and Gas Stations was a joke that someone made like a couple of months ago in like one of my live streams. I think Joe Byrne did make that Goblins and Gas Stations joke, and I thought it was just a joke. Now I'm scared. I assume you're still talking about the pumpkin spice cafe or whatever it was. That sounds really bad. Is that like a self-published thing, or was that published by like an actual like bigger publisher? Just out of curiosity. You understand. I'm not going to read any of that. I try not to do that, Apollo. That sounds like a terrible idea indeed. Wendigo. I think that might work poorly because Wendigos live in climates that are not necessarily winery adjacent, I think, but I'm pretty sure we can come up with with way more of those. It's really bad. Make it more like make it more masculine and have like harpies and hardware stores or something, right? Anyway, uh, yeah, that sounds like an idea. I mean, um, I guess the whole more like polyamorous kind of thing is getting more accepted in a large enough subset of the reading population for it to work like commercially. So that might be it. Not that that's like a new thing. There's stories with exactly that plot line all the way back to the Decameron and even earlier. Like the Satyricon has exactly that kind of story in there somewhere. So it's not new, but it's I think it might have enough of an audience, target audience that is willing to spend money on it for it to become somewhat larger. Which good for them. Now that sounds Bigfoot and the Bodhisattva. That sounds interesting. I wonder if it will be as deep about Buddhism as Lord of Light is supposed to be. But speaking of all of these, shall we adjourn to the place where we all do productive things like reading or writing or both, and do pretend to be productive. And no, I will not write a book about troll farts and tea. Gods. So I'll be back at 25. That sounds reasonable. And I am back. Hello, everybody, and welcome, Ida. I'm unfortunately about to leave for the gym, unless it is the road is too snowed in, and then I don't know what I'll do. Yeah, I did not get too much done, but I did some more research because I feel like I might want to read a bit more on peasant uprisings, which might be interesting. And turns out there's a new history of the German peasant wars coming in February, so that's neat. Uh, Not that I'm going to stop, working on the writing stuff until I've read that book, but it's nice to have something new to look forward to in that regard. Yeah, Kat, I think you're right that a TikTok ban in the US would have some impact, but I don't think that will ever come because, on the one hand, Donald Trump won with apparently a lot of support from people on TikTok. So he doesn't have a reason to ban TikTok anymore. So that's one part. The other part is that that this feels more like an idea of pressuring TikTok to sell at least some parts to some American company. So it feels more like that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that that deal will be made one way or another. So I don't think TikTok will be banned. Also, there's enough ways to get around a ban for an app in wherever you are, and you can be sure that a lot of people will do that. That's I think that part is just too far. Technology has gone too far to make that possible, unless you want to do a full-on North Korean like private internet kind of thing. That sounds like a smart plan in any way, in any case, Chantal, to find a way to go there because yeah. But yeah, I don't think that will happen. I'm not a tech journalist or anything of the sorts, but it doesn't feel like this is going to happen. Like even like right after the elections, you could already see Donald Trump go back on like the whole like let's ban TikTok thing. Even though that was it was bipartisan in a way, but it was certainly driven by some of the weirdest people in the Republican Party. But I'm pretty sure that will not happen. Hey, Barbara, how you doing? I'm about to wrap up the sprints because my plan is to go to the gym now. But I hope I'm not actually, distracting you from work. That's good. That's good, Ida. By productive, you mean actually writing, or you mean working? Because I like paid job working. Yeah, but I understand that cut. I think looking at it, I feel that Chantal is right. It'll just move to a different platform because that community does exist now. It may lose some members, but the same way that back in the day, the more like fandom community moved from LiveJournal when they changed stuff to Tumblr, and when Tumblr did some TOS changes that alienated a lot of people, it moved just to the next platform. These communities just keep moving to a different app, and there will always be a different platform ready for them. That's just like how these things work these days nowadays. So I don't think that'll impact book talk in a way. It may lead to the publishing industry needing like I don't know 2-3 years to figure out which specific sort of like book community to use as their one and only guide to what to publish. But that's like the only thing I could see happening there because stuff is that way. All right, good luck with your meeting. Filling out forms for school sounds like a lot of fun indeed. All right. That being said, I'll better figure out how the winter situation is out there, and if I can get to the gym and force myself, well, not force myself, but get through another couple of hours of the Power Broker, and maybe I'll learn something about uh, highway building in New York, which is, I guess, where we are at the moment. Which, it may come in handy at some point. You never know. So, thanks everybody for hanging out. I, as always, really appreciate it. And I've spoken with Oso, who's sometimes here and in sprints and so forth, and who's doing a lot of most of my thumbnail stuff these days. And we're trying to figure out how to have like a generic thumbnail for the sprints, so I can, uh, have that as well, so they look less barren when I upload them and stuff like that. So that's nice. And yeah, have a fun weekend. I think Barbara is sprinting on Sunday in the morning, so go to the Bookworm Wonder channel, subscribe to her anyway, and there will be sprints entire Sunday morning to noon or something, I suspect. So that's something, and I'll be back on Monday doing these things, and we'll see how stuff will go then. And until then, I don't know. Start a peasants' uprising. I think that is always a good idea. Only don't do it the way all those right-wing peasants are doing it the last couple of years. That's not the way to go. Anyway, have a great day and a wonderful weekend, and I'll see